quest is nearly complete. As you approach the castle, floating over a river of lava, the two brothers approach from opposite sides, when suddenly the ground quakes and starts to give way. One of you risks falling into the lava. Josh, roll a dexterity save to see if your character can catch himself.
Why is it always me? Natural 1. Is that bad?
Oh. All right, Jack. What would you cry out to the heavens when you realize that your character couldn't save his brother and he fell to his death?
Mamma mia! Welcome everyone to Roll Havoc. I'm your host, Jack Steelman, and today we're going to dive into our campaign that uses the Adventures in Middle-earth campaign setting by Cubicle 7. This one is very near and dear to my heart because I'm the DM and it is set in Middle-earth. Here with me today to talk about it are my two best friends. Let's all wish him a very merry unbirthday. It's Ben Grunzel.
Yes, it is definitely not my birthday.
I was hoping. I was trying to see if I remembered correctly. All right.
Odds are in your favor on that.
Here to give us the inside scoop on exactly whose hand Bigby's hand is modeled after, it's Josh Plotkin.
This just in. It's Bigby.
Oh, I guess that would make sense.
Yeah. Intimate knowledge with them. You know.
Yeah, right. You're very aware. Like if that hand is like well manicured, right? It's like, man, Bigby obviously moisturized. I think
you probably have a.
I don't care what it looks like. Does it crush my enemies? That's really
magical acting, I guess. Magical hand modeling, I suppose. Yeah.
So the core of this campaign, what I really like about it is that it actually does take the Middle-earth setting and it gives you a rule set to actually interact with some really cool stuff if you're familiar with Middle-earth at all. So it takes place in the timeline between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is about a 60-year span. And in the core map of the book, they actually only focus on the wild. So if you're only familiar with the Lord of the Rings movies, you know things like Rivendell, Rohan, Gondor, the Shire, like those are all kind of outside the scope. Rivendell is kind of like the breach of the wildness, where like that actually shows up a lot in those stories because it's kind of where the Western civilization meets the wild. But how do you guys feel about it? Like, what do you guys like about the campaign? And let's talk about your characters. I want to dive into them and like what your inspiration was and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously it's a ton of fun to play. I mean, I think we're all big Middle-earth fans, but you're the biggest. So you're a great person to be running the game because you really understand the lore in depth and you could do the voices really well.
It's key. I might not be a great DM, but I will give you the voices.
And I don't think I need to say anything after Ben. He just said everything I wanted to say right there. Done. That's why I love it.
And I really like the system too. Cubicle 7 had their own system for a Lord of the Rings game called The One Ring.
Right.
And then they decided to do an adaptation for 5e. And from my understanding, it was a much more financially successful to do that. Yeah. Even though a lot of the travel stuff was kind of tacked on directly from The One Ring. But I like how they kind of depowered the classes a little bit, made them a little bit more appropriate to Middle-earth, where you can still get up into high level without having like typical spells that kind of like break reality that aren't really appropriate. I play a wanderer who's like a ranger, but instead of just having an ability that basically hand waves travel where it's not important, it gives you bonuses on the travel system. I much prefer that way to do it because I like exploring. I want to get into the nitty gritty of it, not just say, oh yeah, you have a ranger in your party, so you just travel for 5 weeks, no problem.
Right.
Why did I play a ranger if we're going to skip over all my cool stuff? Like
all the rangering, if you will.
Yeah. Dear Ranger Diary. Yeah.
That is one thing that I do really like. It's a huge component of the setting is the journeys. They take that theme from the Lord of the Rings, where it's just like, by the time you get to the destination, so much has already happened that the characters are supposed to have been impacted or changed on the way. Like they're supposed to change and something is supposed to affect them along the way. And so it really is kind of like they wanted a mechanic specifically to embody that. And so they have what's the journey system, and each character picks a role within the journey system. And so when you actually have to have the characters plot a course from one spot to another. And we've kind of like, we've hit an interesting point with that I'll talk about later. But I do want to hear kind of specifically about why you guys picked the characters you did, because we have the 4 classes that were in there. You have the Slayer, the Burglar, the Scholar, and the Wanderer. The Burglar is like a treasure hunter. Sorry, it's treasure hunter. They're sneaky. They get like bonuses to like sneak attack and stuff like that. And then the Slayer is like a warrior type. But you guys, tell me about the characters you guys picked. Ben said he picked the Wanderer, but Josh's character is pretty great.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Ragnacar, the Remedy. Yeah, he's a master healer scholar. And that's a lot of words to mean that he is the wizard cleric bard of the party with no spells, absolutely no spells, because again, the setting doesn't have them.
It's very hard to be a wizard cleric bard without any spells.
I sound so unenthused
but it works.
about him, but he is fabulous. So when we decided we were going to play Middle Earth, I remember I read the whole PDF. I wanted to figure out what was going on with it. And when I knew it was going to be kind of about seeing all the areas. So what I wanted to do was to be able to see all the areas. But then I also basically just the biggest thing was like, man, this is a dangerous setting. Like because of what the monsters can do versus what you're able to do. It's like everything felt like you were already really handicapped. So I wanted to do something that was like survival. So that's why I went with the master healer, because they, for some reason, it's like the only magic that any of the classes can do consistently, which is heal like crazy.
It's very thematic for Middle Earth, because it's like, well, they actually give you herbology. They give you alchemy. They give you ways to make salves out of like ethyles. Like they literally like quote that stuff in there, and some other really cool effects you can get from making potions and poisons and stuff. It's really neat. But that's how they justify, like, it's not like it's healing potions, but it's healing potions, you know?
Well, that's why like when it's like 2d8 plus your class level or something like that, if you do it in combat, but if you just wait 10 minutes instead, it works like 8 times that effect, something like that. So that's the idea of that. If you can do the coverings, but like you can just like run up to someone and then heal them from basically equivalent now like a giant sword wound.
Yeah.
So it's pretty useful, but I didn't know it was going to be that good. I just knew I was going to be vulnerable, and I knew that we were going to be making a lot of skill checks because of adventuring. So I also realized it was just going to be 2 of us, and we needed to cover a lot. I even took that virtue, which is a feat in the setting, virtue, to get the hound, so that I would have a third body to do other tasks with, and to, of course, take heat off of me because of my vulnerable little bones.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, his background was that woodmans of the Wilderness, which is like the people that live in Mirkwood, right?
Yeah, the woodsman. I feel like I wouldn't do any justice like describing your character's background, but I'm really happy with the backgrounds both of you guys picked too, the backstories and stuff. I felt like they were very appropriate, and I was very happy to work with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like, as a woodsman of the Wilderland, I picked that area because that's where humans are, but also that's where Radagast lives. And since this guy was magic, I kind of wanted him to like have some connection to it. And you were allowed to you let it so that like he's basically like a father to me. I'm a 40-year-old man, but like he's a wizard, so he doesn't age at all. I guess he saw some magic in me, so I was able to go the magician route. So I have like a name, the Remedy, because people come to me and they get healed. Like, it's just some notoriety, but it's only because maybe I have some realness, But basically I did what I do all the time, and that he's a druid. He's got he's got an animal companion. He does nature-y stuff. Surprise. Now he has some spells, thanks to you. They're not supposed to have them, that's for sure.
One of the cool things about the setting is that it encourages you to do audiences with powerful characters and audiences with even named known characters, as long as you get the feel for the game right. You guys have met all 5 of the wizards at this point, like in this game. Like I've already said, like, hey, you have these wizards, but you just don't remember the blue ones. So this is pretty cool. Yeah. But it encourages that. So it was pretty neat that you were just like, I want to be associated with Radagast. I'm like, let's do it. Like, it's pretty great. It's a great backstory. And it's like wizards are up to all sorts of mysterious shit. Why wouldn't they have this type of thing?
And like as a scholar, like that's the class that's built to talk to these people in the right way that they want to be talked to. Like that's my thing. It gives you like tongues. like basically like the bard's ability to like, speak any language that you just kind of hear for a little bit. It's pretty useful. Yeah. But like he'd be nothing though without at least like Ben's character there hitting something.
Which leads us to
I'm playing Angus McCruthen. So I had an idea thinking like if I've ever played any type of Middle Earth game, I wanted to play one of the wild men from I'm more familiar with the movies, so I'm thinking of like the wild men who got coaxed into attacking Rohan by Saruman. And
that's exactly
because it's pretty and it's pretty obvious that they're kind of like inspired by like the ideas of like the wild hillmen, like guys in the woods. So like a lot of like the Picts maybe. Like I'm a bit of a I'm like a history buff, not nearly to the extent that Tolkien is.
You're so buff.
Yeah.
You're working out, man?
Swole with history knowledge. So I was like, hey, can I play one of these guys? And you're like, and I the Dunlendings, which I was not familiar with that name.
Yeah.
And they're not, and also when we decided to play this game, I didn't realize like the scope, like the smaller scope of like where you start out in Middle Earth, and they're not one of the groups there. And he's like, well, just pick something that
you want to be like a lone wanderer type anyway.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, it works out fine.
I like the idea of like, okay, my people are being corrupted by Saruman, but I fled rather than fall to that corruption. So I think technically I'm picking the same list of virtues as Josh's character, as like the woodman, just geared towards different stuff. And like I said, Wanderer seemed really cool because I want somebody who can travel around a lot. They're still pretty good at fighting, like kind of like Rangers are.
I was really happy that how capable he is, especially when like you kind of like said, like, all right, you take the safe route because you have like the option of wearing a shield if you want to. Your axe is versatile, so you can use it one hand or two hands, like however you want.
Right.
So
yeah.
That's a huge thing in this setting because mundane equipment is still good. Like you're
right. Yeah.
This is a setting where it's like tabletop RPG mechanic wise, it is a low magic setting because you don't have like wizards making magic swords on the corner of every city. Like all of the magic you're going to find is going to be an artifact, and it's going to be in the natural world where weird shit is still happening outside the scope of man. Like that's why it's a low magic setting. That means the magic is more subtle until you encounter it, and then it's overpowering and terrifying.
Yeah. And also like that term Tolkien got called like high fantasy or epic fantasy. And this was back in, the 40s when
he was the fantasy.
Yeah, like there wasn't that much fantasy around. So it was more about the epic scope of good versus evil versus like sword and sorcery, which is like Conan like wanted to.
You kind of described it like H.P. Lovecraft, actually, but with horror. That's basically magic
theme in that time too.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things about like Angus gets a shield and he gets a versatile axe, and it's like that's really good for you guys.
Yeah, I think right now my armor class is like 20, and I maxed out con instead of strength or dexterity. So like I'm tough.
Yeah,
which helps a lot.
I'm not.
Yeah, so like I kind of mixed in like between wanting to play like a Dunlending, and I kind of pulled a little bit from like. So like in medieval heraldry, there's these creatures called the woodwose, which were like like the idea was like if a man lived in the woods long enough, he would go wild and become like a Sasquatch. And they showed up in medieval heraldry as like symbols of like savage nobility kind of. And it's like, well, Tolkien obviously had some of that inspiration when he was designing these.
Right, yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to go, I'm like a wild man who like wandered into, like even compared to the woodmen that Josh's character is from, right. Like seems pretty wild. And the name is I went with like something that sounded Pictish or Scottish.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The cultures kind of take the place of races in this setting. And there's actually a bunch of them. You could be like the Bardings, who are the followers of King Bard over in Dale, the Bjornings, who are followers of Beorn in the woods. The Dunedain, you can be a Dunedain ranger like Aragorn. There are the dwarves, the elves of Mirkwood, hobbits. You could be men of Bree, men of the lake, men of Minas Tirith. Like there's just like each different culture has its own set of virtues that you get to pick from.
A lot of men.
Yeah, there's a lot.
A lot of men.
A lot. Well, and that's
no women of. I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's a little touchy for Tolkien, right?
Yeah,
his 40s sensibilities.
Yeah.
As far as like magic items and stuff go, you guys do have a couple, and it's very interesting because the magic items you guys are going to get are going to be artifacts. And so that's like, you don't have them like made for you. If you find them, it's probably like you have to uncover what they really are to like get the full scope of how to use them. I think after a point, I really got interested in Ben's character and where Josh's character came from. So I've been trying to intermingle some of the like characteristics into the plot line of it. So like we've been following some stuff about the White Howlers, which is Ben's clan.
Yeah, I stole that name from Werewolf the Apocalypse. The tribe of werewolves from Scottish Highlands was called the White Howlers before they were corrupted.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Josh's character is based in the Mirkwood. I wanted to use some of the story elements of the corruption that's going on there. And so it's just been super fun throwing these different challenges at you guys with like spiders and orcs and goblins, and the undead that you guys come across has been really a lot of fun.
It's spider goblins.
Goblins,
orc spiders.
Shape-shifting spiders that look like orcs at one point. And so I'm, as a DM, I can say this, like we're at a point in this campaign where like things are about to like start becoming a little more clear, and so I'm very anxious to like get you guys through the next adventure.
Me too.
Because the enemy is the shadow, and both of those words are capitalized.
Yeah,
that's as specific as it gets. It's like the enemy is the shadow. And it's like you guys never, like, you encounter all this darkness, but you don't know what's going on with it. It's just like kind of popping up, and part of the adventure is figuring that out. I really wanted to mention about the Comiog.
The Comiog. He is the Comiog. He's special.
Something else I draw inspiration on is the Middle Earth video games, Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War. I've used some elements from those.
That's where Comiog is from, right?
That's where Comiog is from. Yeah. Right. I introduced things like Caragors into the setting just because, actually, I didn't even really introduce Caragors into the setting. I introduced this one thing into the setting because you guys were probably never going to go to Mordor, and Caragors are technically not like Tolkien canon. They exist specifically in the video game.
Yeah.
So that probably won't come up like too often. It's just like a giant lizard cat. It's pretty much, they look like wargs, honestly, is what they look like more than anything. Just feline instead of
wolfine.
Instead of wolf, yeah. Lupine.
Yeah. I said wolfine. Yeah, listen to me.
What do you guys like about exploring the setting? Like what are some like things that you've enjoyed about? We talk about the journey system. What do you guys like about the journey system?
So I like how, it's broken into kind of three pieces of like the journey starts, and there's always like some kind of event that kind of affects roles further on the journey. Like, it's bright and sunny, everybody's in a good mood, or it's like raining as soon as you guys set off and you have penalties on something. And then you have like a bunch of random events, makes every journey different. And it's a lot more interesting than just rolling for like random encounters every way. Cause there's just, they could be challenges. They could be things that help. I mean, one time we got a ride from Ints. So that was awesome.
Sweet.
Some really good rolls.
Yeah, really good rolls.
And then you make when you arrive at your destination, you make one final roll kind of affected by everything else that's gone on. And it affects, so like, in theory, if you're traveling to an adventure site, you're affected by your journey. You whether it's potentially levels of exhaustion or inspiration, or, there's different things that can happen.
You can gain advantage on rolls and stuff if the first wave of an encounter. That includes both like if the end of your destination is like a combat encounter, or if it's a RP encounter. If you're traveling to Dale and you get there and you need to speak to King Bard, you could potentially get advantages on, getting in to speak to King Bard and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it's really cool to just have some structure to exploration. It's a little bit different because like it's usually either like hand waved or you're doing like a hex crawl where it's maybe too in depth. I'm always looking at different ways to spice up exploration. So it's been great to explore this system. And I mean, we get lots of bonuses because between having a scholar and a wanderer, we're really good at skills.
Yeah,
we are primed for this. But I think it's cool because it lets us get there on good standing, because we're not the most primed for combat party. Like,
right.
I'm not a knight in armor. I'm a guy in a warg skin with a cursed axe. And then we have a scholar who's like, I can heal you, or I can send my dog after it.
And everybody does like me when they run into me too. That's been very useful. Useful part of the whole thing. Because it's not really, I'm not really used to playing characters that like want people's assistance all that much, but that's like all Ragnacar is about. is getting help. Like
Yeah.
I said, I show up with this guy that shouldn't be in a city, and I say I need help hunting a werewolf, and then people give me magical weapons to do so. They're like, here you go.
Right.
Go get him.
It ends up
Sweet.
and so like the theme of that too is like, of course, like you get help from the wife of the blacksmith who was quote unquote murdered by the werewolf.
Yeah.
And of course she knows some like ancient elven secret for curing werewolves.
Ancient elven
Ancient, yeah, very convenient. And yeah, you end up curing the werewolf, and it's surprise, it's the blacksmith.
The adventuring part, you've used it by the way the rules in the book are, but you've used it to push the plot forward too, because things can kind of happen in that adventure that makes some more sense about what we're going into later on, I feel. And it's kind of like, it's almost like you're, as an author, like you could input red herrings if we're rolling badly, or you could, or be very direct.
It's really cool. In the Lore Master's Guide, they actually give you the deconstructed version of all of that, and so it actually tells you, like, in the player's guide, this journey check will say like, okay, like if you roll really low, it says like, oh, it's bad omens the entire journey. And it's just like, it gives you kind of very vague like description of what's going on, because it kind of wants the players to have a little bit of a taste of like what's really going on when we're making all these rolls. In the Lore Master's Guide, it's like, no, like if they roll a 1, it's like they get exhaustion. Yeah, if they roll a 2, they encounter, it's in a combat encounter. If they roll a 3, they travel with no event. It's like kind of goes like that.
All right.
And they talk about,
seems rudimentary.
You should use that it should all tie into the journey that the characters are taking. You should definitely find a way. It's like, it kind of gives you that deconstructed like mechanic explanation so that you can, however you get it to fit in the story, do this. That's pretty much like what they're saying. And it's like, it works really well. And like, they also talk about like, there are going to be characters that like will never fail like some of these checks. And so you have to find ways to like keep it interesting for them too, because if you're always just every time getting everywhere you need to go, like sunshine and rainbows, just like, it doesn't make for an interesting story. And it's like, you can still like, don't obviously like fudge their roles or like try to screw with them, but you've got to keep it interesting. They've got to encounter something that's going to make them think about the journey.
There was like one time we rolled well, but we still like ran into a bunch of dwarves, I think. And if we acted incorrectly, we could have had a fight on our hands. Technically, they're just not like, they weren't inclined to do so. And if we were to have a fight at that point, it would have been bad. It made it so that I could still do what I like to do, which is, to make it into a game of 5 machine that works effectively, right? So that's why I was able to get the Scholar with Hound, and the Hound gives me like,
skill bonuses on
skill
top
bonuses
of
on top of skill bonuses on top of giving me advantage on all of those rolls. And I'm like, this is awesome. It's like, if this is like a combat, I am succeeding at this.
It really is. And you guys has actually picked skill sets that complement each other really well. Like you have the knowledge based and healing based and still survival based skill set. And then Angus is more about the wilderness traveling survival. And then also I think you both actually have shadow lore, and so like you have some type of knowledge of the shadow.
I can cure the weapons of the enemy. That's right. Nazgul breath, no enemy, problem to me.
Enemy, capital E.
Yeah, it's capitalized. Enemy.
Yeah, and I like how like the enemy, the shadow, and a lot of the stuff, like it really sets the tone for it, and the travel rules help support that too. Like I remember one time we just like came across like a broken statue of a king that had been forgotten, and we had to basically like save versus being kind of sad about it.
Yeah.
And we're like, and so it's like, like we got shadow points, and we just kind of like stopped and like, yeah, my characters just, makes them think about how everything falls apart and I may never see home again. And then like, and Josh's character shares his inner, like we're sharing our inner reflection a lot.
Yeah.
And it fits the source material, because there's like that kind of weariness of war and struggle that is part of Lord of the Rings. And we're kind of playing with like some dramatic irony of, we know that the war is coming and we're just caught up in the build up to it.
There's a lot of melancholy between that heroism, like quite a
it's
bit.
kind of, and that whole feeling is of the setting where they say sometimes things do feel just like super hopeless, and the heroes aren't necessarily the people who show up in shining armor. It's the people who push forward and get fucked up and still manage to make it on the other side. And that's like that's in every aspect of this campaign setting. It's in the combat as well, because the combat, we talked about it a little bit last time, the combat in this setting is actually really fun for me because it's always going to be a tipping point. Like when you get to the big scenes, there's always going to be a tipping point where you guys have to decide, like, is this fight worth fighting now? Like, and it's like there's always going to be that kind of situation. What have you guys learned about the combat in this setting? Like,
well, I mean, first and foremost, Komiog, which if we didn't say it directly, is a Caragor made out of plants, I believe.
We could go into that, like
manifested by the forest to help us.
Yes, manifest. Basically, he's a friend of Radagast's, and Radagast said, "Please go help him." But you gave us him because it would be no fun for you, the level of challenge of things you'd have to throw at us for us to survive. You know, you needed a beat or something that could hurt and take some hurt, and so there's him. That's his use. Outside of that, yeah, combat is absolutely terrifying from my character's point of view.
One thing they say in the player's guide or the lore master's guide, they say in one of the books that combat in Middle Earth, and if you look at it, it's actually very true through all of even the movies, even the Hobbit movies, all of the combat situations that come up in Middle Earth are vastly in favor of the enemy, because you always have overwhelming numbers. You have a darkness that is unimaginable, you know, spiders that talk like will boggle the normal mind kind of thing. And they're also massive spiders. What do you do against that? The orcs of Mordor are just like fueled on hate. That's literally, they don't need to eat because it's like they only eat because they like eating stuff, like eating things. There's all of this pressure that has to be on the party, and you have to use, they talk about how the environment is a crucial part of that too, because most of Middle Earth, most of the topography of Middle Earth is ruins. A lot of it is. So you guys are traveling through ruins all the time.
Yeah.
There are ruins under the mountains. There are ruins in the forests. There's just like ruins everywhere. And it's supposed to be like you're constantly fighting this overwhelming darkness where the proof is all around you that everything just succumbs to it in time. And it's just this neat take on how you have to approach the combat situations, but also as like the RP too.
Yeah, I'm a lot of times trying to capture like a kind of Dark Ages type feel when I run D&D. I kind of like going like with like the lower tech and like the heightened sense of danger, and Middle Earth just nails that. I mean, it's because it's, you know, it's isolated kingdoms. You don't just, it's not like you don't just walk into a big bustling city and sign up with the Adventurers Guild and get sent missions. And, you know, it's like, no, like kingdoms are falling apart. If you want to talk to somebody, you have to try to get an audience, and maybe they'll talk to you, maybe they'll run you out of town.
Yeah.
And yeah, and every traveling seems dangerous. Any type of fight seems dangerous. You never assume that this is a level appropriate encounter. We go with the fiction. We fought like spiders and had to like lure them into burning their webs so that we had an advantage. We do a lot of scouting, and we do a lot of running. I remember we had a fight where like we stood our ground until like reinforcements got there, and then we're out of here. And that it didn't feel like a failure. It felt like that we did what we were supposed to do, distract them for a little bit of time so somebody else could do their thing.
We spend a lot of our time planning, and I do that on purpose because I am a scholar. Like it's not necessarily how I play D&D usually. I usually, like, once we're in combat, I can look around it. But like, yeah, this, because he's the scholar, because he's so wise, he is trying to outthink the enemy at every point he possibly can do, because he knows how fragile.
Right. We kind of talk about how your guys' character's skill set make it to where you can like manipulate the beginning of a battle, at least. And that's like, I feel like that's a really cool advantage to give like skill-based characters,
because he can get us there faster than the enemy ever can. And then with whatever knowledge between the two of us, traps or just, thinking outside the box has helped us basically overcome the enemy. Obviously, it's up to you to make it work in our favor sometimes. So, I mean, maybe sometimes you're generous.
Well, no, the roles roles always justify it. I like, this is actually a DM style thing that I picked up specifically because of Ben. Like, Ben makes all his roles in the open, and I respect that. I respect the shit out of that. So we make all the roles out in the open with this. And so it's like, I'm not fudging any numbers. You guys are legitimately always ahead on the prep. And that's the coolest thing about your characters, because it's like, no, we're not going to just like wade in there and start chopping heads off. It's like, we're going to like figure out where we need to go. We're going to figure out how to get there. Well, and whenever you guys do have an advantage, that's the thing about Middle Earth, is like, when the good guys have the advantage, it's always like on an epic scale.
Yeah. Well, once you're playing in a setting without resurrection magic, you have to start thinking like you have one life to live. And even my dog, like I get another dog if this one dies, but like, no, this is my dog. I'm very attached to this dog. When I send it in to fight something terrifying, it is not because I don't care about it. It's like, once it reaches half hit points, it comes back to me and I protect it. Now the whole fight is different because of that. Like, I care about him living. I care about me living. I care about Angus living, even though he really generally takes care of himself, besides a couple scrapes.
Pretty well, honestly.
Yeah. It's the high armor class and hit points combination is really does it.
Yeah. And if we were playing, like 2 Slayers, tons of weapons and armor and everything, but without the skill set we have, instead of getting quickly to where we need to go and being able to scout ahead and come up with a plan, would be like stumbling into an orc camp with bloody and exhausted already, with no intel, and have to fight our way out, which I honestly feel like we're better suited for the type of adventures we're going on.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work. We would be dead if we were 2 Boromirs stumbling into a fight.
Exactly. It's like, look at what happens to Boromir showing up with that shit, right?
I mean, he does kill a lot.
Oh my god, he does so many arrows. Pincushion.
And Boromir, it gets a bad rap. He had a moment of weakness, and he tried to redeem himself like almost immediately.
That's kind of a cool thing about this setting too, that we haven't really talked about, and we haven't really gotten into too much, because you guys are so good at all of your journey checks and saves that you avoid a lot of shadow conflict.
Yep.
So there's a mechanic in the game, in this system, where you build shadow points over a certain amount of time, and when it reaches shadow points equal to, I want to say, your wisdom score, you have to make one big save where if you fail, you have like a psychotic break, and I control your character who does something super shitty. This is like at the very end of the Lord of the Rings, Frodo, he has the chance to throw the ring in the lava, and he goes to put it on. That's him failing his save, kind of thing.
Spoilers.
Yeah. Oh no. My favorite spoiler for that is like when the first Hobbit movie came out, I was like, oh no, Gandalf dies. Someone was like, really? You asshole. I was like, he dies in the Lord of the Rings. Come on. Anyway, but you guys are so good at your saves that you don't really encounter a lot of the shadow points. And that's one thing that's supposed to actually build up over time and will affect your characters. Like, after you have that first break, your character actually is supposed to take on another personality trait that is related to the shadow. It's like Frodo never got over his wounds and stuff like that. So that's another kind of cool thing that you guys don't necessarily sidestep. We have, like, I think more recently, as we get higher in levels, it has been coming up more and more. And so I'm excited to see how that progresses.
Yeah, I was playing like terrified to get shadow points until I realized that you can get like a few and you're fine. It's more once you get up closer to your wisdom score. So
I mean,
now I'm trying to lean into it a little bit more, but
I've been taking things that remove shadow points, like with aims to make it so that we can just get rid of them, because I thought they were really scary too.
They are kind of scary, but
I have one.
You guys
level
have
9.
But that's the thing, you've come across a few scenarios where it's like you rolled well enough to where you wouldn't haven't really encountered that. And whenever it does kind of come up, you guys seem kind of surprised, and I'm just like, yeah, no, that's something that's shadow. It's like there's only a few times where it's kind of come up where it's like, no, that's automatic, like you're gonna have to like save against it.
And it's not always something as like explicit as like, you have to like murder someone in cold blood, or you have to be like possessed by a demon or something like that. It's like you just see something that kind of brings you down, and that's how like shadow gradually creeps in and corrupts you.
A lot of it has to do with abusing power. So like using, and it's something that it came up once because Angus got a magic ring. He got an elven ring. And it's a shield ring. It gives him bonus to his AC. It's ultimately a very good item to have. But there was a check at one point where I was like, no, you're wearing a ring of power, and this is something that would draw some of your bloodlust or power hunger out. And so like you made a shadow check, and I was like, all right, you failed it. And I was like, that's a shadow point. Yeah. Do you guys have any favorite moments in this campaign that we want to talk about? I have a bunch, but
realizing that the orcs we were fighting were just spiders wearing orc skin suits was pretty memorable. Pretty freaky.
I would say fighting the giant shadow wyvern on top of like basically the equivalent of, it was in the same place as where the Nazgul were, right? It was the same type of mountaintop.
No, you guys, no, that was where you guys freed a giant eagle from the Nazgul.
Right, that's off. Different. Yeah. I'm talking about the wyvern.
The wyvern was on a mountaintop. It was on a hilltop in Dunland. It was an ancient enemy of the White Howlers, and you had gone to slay the White Howlers' ancient enemy to cleanse Angrod.
That was
or Nothrod. And turn into Angrod, the Shadow Splitter. Yeah.
By the way that you described that the goal is for things to feel hopeless and then still for you to succeed, then that fight, it nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. Because I was like, we're never gonna win it. Cause it killed Gomeo. It killed him. Like, yeah, I know. He's not even back yet. I haven't even figured out how to do that yet. Working on it.
Yeah.
Working on it.
And it was also really cool for Angus to go back to kind of confront his fears with his home tribe, and stand up to some of the other clan leaders that were already falling into bloodlust and following the shadow, and kind of basically save his closest kinfolk, and kind of because they're kind of relocated to another part of Rohan where they're living peacefully, so like they won't be, again, like dramatic irony, they won't be part of the attack on Rohan by the wild men in the Two Towers movie.
It is about how do you want to interact with what is Tolkien canon. They give you a setting. They say, go to Mirkwood, like explore what's going on there. They give you all like the challenge ratings for like this area is worse than over here. They say, here's what's going on in Erebor and what's going on with the dwarves. They encourage you to explore all this stuff that is Middle Earth. And then they also say like, it's okay to have cameos as long as it's not like the focus of your adventure. Like, I don't have a reason to send you guys off to see Uncle Bilbo. Like, there's no reason. Like, that's not the kind of adventure this is.
Yeah.
But I did send you guys out to Dunland, Isengard, to Rohan, to Helm's Deep. You had an adventure outside of Helm's Deep. Like, all this stuff is, and that's all off map. That's all outside of the scope of the adventure setting. But it's a really neat mechanic that they say, if you want to have Gandalf show up on the road to provide a boon that the party has earned through skill checks, give them what they want. Like, that's kind of what we want. That's what we came to Middle Earth for, is like, we want to see we want to see wizards, we want to see dragons, we want to see elves and orcs and dwarves under the mountain, and we want to sing songs about all this stuff. And like, they set it up so well. I feel like I've just had so much fun with this setting.
Couldn't have said it better myself about what people want, and yeah, it's great that you have taken us around everywhere. I mean, we haven't just been everywhere, we're like special everywhere. We're like a big deal. We're level 9, man.
Level 9.
That's a big deal in Middle Earth. We've seen some stuff, and we're gonna see a lot more stuff, some weird stuff. Speaking of weird stuff, actually, I realized what my favorite one was.
What's that?
Now, the wyvern was great because it was terrifying, but the other one was the final showdown with the werewolf, or de-werewolfing the werewolf, where I finally got to use one magic item I had for True Strike once per day, and then I had to come out how this works in Middle Earth looking stuff, because magic is not a thing. And I was able to like
Right.
call upon the wind to shoot this spear, 70 feet across a mountainous terrain to pin the thing along the side. And then I think then Angus was able to mop it up soon afterwards, if I recall. It was pretty epic, I'd say. Yeah, it was very satisfying.
That's
very, very much like I felt like I was in a Lord of the Rings movie.
Right. And that's always been like my goal, is that like I want it to have, if we had like the Lord of the Rings soundtrack on in the background, I'd want it to fit. That's always kind of like where I'm coming from.
We play it like Ben plays it, doesn't he? I mean,
well, I mean, there is that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, I did my little guitar, rock version.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Super happy with it.
It's why I like to win things. It's because we get to listen. It's like the Final Fantasy victory music.
Yeah,
that's satisfying. Yeah,
it's very satisfying. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the Middle Earth campaign. I've had so much fun talking about it. I can't wait till the next time that we get to play it and you guys get to figure out where all these big ass spiders are coming from. But this is Jack Steelman with Roll Havoc telling you to have a good night, sleep tight, and don't let the bed bugbears bite. We'll see you next time.